Good now. No outbursts. No, actually, I'd prefer outbursts. It makes it more interesting. It's great to be with you today. I so appreciate rejoining you. I had to take a bit of break after coming pretty regularly to be with you for a long time because we've been working on a massive capital campaign to build a wonderful new building for my center, Beacon Center, and we just broke ground on Tuesday, so it's an exciting time, and so as that campaign has kind of faded a little bit, I'm like, I think I could start coming back a bit. So it's great to be here today. Opening words today come from our beloved Hoosier, Kurt Vonnegut, and he tells us this. He says, and Unitarian actually. And he tells us this: be soft. Do not let the world make you hard. Do not let pain make you hate. Do not let the bitterness steal your sweetness. Take pride that even though the rest of the world may disagree, you still believe it to be a beautiful place. Awake, my dear, be kind to your beating heart. Awake, my dear, be kind to your beating heart. Take it out into the vast fields of light and let it breathe. Take it out into the vast fields of light and let it breathe. Awake, my dear, be kind to your beating heart. Awake, my dear, be kind to your beating heart. I got some tough to talk with you today, because it wouldn't be a sermon if we didn't at least talk about some hard stuff that's going on in our world. A little over 2 weeks ago, and this is my specialty, of course. My specialty is homelessness. I work with homelessness, so I talk about it a lot, of course, but I also think it's a mirror in many ways for the rest of the world and has great opportunity to tell us what's going on. And a little over 2 weeks ago, there was a conversation on homelessness that came up on Fox News. Yeah, some of you may have heard about it, yeah. And they began to talk about people experiencing homelessness who refuse services, people who are outside and living outside or living in shelters or wherever, but people with severe mental illnesses and challenges who refuse services. And it's interesting to know, before I say too much about what they said, one of the major symptoms or criteria of some severe mental illnesses, one of the actual defining symptoms is that you don't know you're sick. And so people with severe mental illness sometimes don't even know that they have an issue, because that's part of the symptoms of the illness that they have. So to choose like some kind of service or something like that doesn't apply very well when you're dealing with someone who doesn't even think or have an awareness that they're ill. But one of the hosts in this conversation about homelessness and this issue, Lawrence Jones, he said, either you take the resources that we're going to give you, or you decide you got to be locked up in jail. You take the resources or you got to be locked up in jail. Which is, that statement all by itself is a pretty dramatic statement. That's a pretty like, wow, strong statement. But it was overshadowed by the statement that came after that from his co-host, Brian Kilmeade, who said, or involuntary lethal injection, or something. You just kill him. That was said on national TV by a major show in our country very recently. And, gratefully, there was enormous uproar about the comment, although maybe not as much as there should have been, because I think a lot of us didn't even hear about it. I barely even heard about it until several days after, and it was kind of a side conversation that, obviously perked up in my ears that I had to go find out what there was going on. But, the uproar came, which was good. That's what we need. We need people to say, this is not okay, it's not acceptable. And Kilmeade apologized. He wasn't fired, though, for suggesting that state-sponsored murder of tens of thousands of mentally ill people would be a good thing to do. I don't know how you keep someone who could say something so horrible on your staff, but he's still working along there. Following that apology. And again, I think, and no one criticized the other host's comments, about incarcerating folks. And truthfully, there's been a lot of talk about homelessness now and the idea of solving the problem with this. You go to prison or you go to a shelter that you have to stay in, or you can go to prison. And how is that different from an internment camp? I really start to ask these questions. What's the difference that we're going to try and forcibly put people in camps? And again, this is horrible. And truthfully, our world has tried this before. Many of us forget that the Holocaust began with the mass experimentation on and euthanizing of people with disabilities. And it's important for us to remember them. At the time, within the Nazi regime, they had a name for people with disabilities. They called them useless eaters, that they took without giving back. That was this extraordinary criticism. Everybody had to be productive, and we needed to, eliminate the people who were not. Imagine looking at a human being and describing them as a useless eater, thinking about them in that way. I wrote a social media post the other day, and it went like this, and imagine seeing someone sleeping outside on a bench and hating them rather than feeling grief at their situation. And I then continued, that's how damaged some of us have become. And then I said, love is the only way, because I'm a preacher and I do that. Bloomington actually now has a local page. This has just happened again in the last couple of months, maybe even less than that, maybe a month or so. They now have this page that's drawn quite a bit of attention, and it's dedicated to the hatred of homeless people. I'm not going to name it because it doesn't deserve your attention, and the way that social media happens now is that you give something attention and it grows, and I don't like that. But I do want to say that its purpose is to actively depict people without homes in horrible ways. They take photos of people sleeping outside and in compromising positions, and they generally blame them for everything they perceive to be wrong in our mid-sized city here in Indiana. On Friday night, some of you may have heard this and you may have not, but on Friday there were two major violent incidents in Bloomington that took place, and they were both directed at people without homes. The first was a group assault where an actual mob of, in this case it was students, attacked and beat up three people, badly injuring them. All three of those folks were homeless folks who were downtown. And the second was a murder, that there was a person in a car. And as what I've heard so far about the stories change, so sometimes you don't always know exactly what happened. But this person in the car apparently asked some homeless folks if they were looking for trouble, and then shot and killed one of them right out of his car. And this, this happened just down the road, 45 minutes away, drive 45 minutes away, 2 days ago. And there is no doubt in my mind that the hateful and violent rhetoric, that hateful and violent rhetoric leads to these kinds of acts. There's no doubt that when we say, when we talk about people like we have to clean them up, or we have to imprison them, or we have to inject them, or we, attack them for existing, there's no doubt in my mind that leads to violent acts. Each year, homeless people are murdered more often in the United States than any other vulnerable classification of people, with one exception. That's more often than race, that's more often than religion, and more often than politics. And it's at the same level as people who are transgender, that they are murdered about the same rate in our country, related to their particular grouping. I believe strongly that our culture and our society is struggling with something, just a crisis of empathy. And I focus on homelessness because it's what I know, it's my area of experience. But I also think it's a canary in the coal mine a bit. It's one of those early indicators of other dangerous issues before us or soon to come. But of course, this crisis is present in so many ways in our culture. We struggle to recognize our shared humanity in so many ways across lines of race and religion and ethnicity and nationality and immigration status and gender and sexual orientation and poverty and education and politics. I was thinking about that welcoming over who we love. And the truth of the matter is, I think we're really scared. I think as a country, we're really, really scared. I think we're terrified, honestly, as a country. And the worst part of it is we're scared of each other. It's a little silly, I know, but sometimes silliness is worthwhile. But the ever-wise Yoda really helped us understand this when he said to the young Anakin Skywalker, who, spoiler alert, became Darth Vader, in case you didn't know that, sorry. But Yoda says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And when I first heard this, I always thought about it as our own suffering. But hate leads to other suffering too. It leads to the suffering, not just of ourselves, but the suffering of others. I will say that with some clarity, I believe this fear is being intentionally cultivated. I think it's being done on purpose, because I believe it makes people money, and it gives dangerous people, power. So I think there's a vested interest in us all being afraid. I think this is happening on purpose because it works to make some people very rich. When crime goes down, but the fear of crime goes up, which is exactly what's happening in our country, something is very, very wrong. If we are more afraid of crime, but crime is going down, what is that? That's not what's going on around crime. Right now, lots of cities, Chicago and Washington, D.C. and Portland and places are being painted as some of the most dangerous cities in the United States, and yet none of them fit in our nation's top 10. Chicago is enjoying its lowest violent crime rate in 60 years. And yet, there's all this rhetoric about how dangerous it is. And I have to ask myself again, why is this so? Who gains by making people fear this way? We are, of course, aware of the 24-hour news cycle, and that is driven by ratings, what draws us to watch, what catches our attention. The old phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, is now something that's trying to be procured 24/7 to keep the ratings up. But I also think it's really important to think about something that many of us feel is a little less innocuous, a little less dangerous, which is social media, which has been a very ever-present part of many of our lives for going on at least 15 years now. And there was a time where it wasn't really there. But the power or the challenge of social media is it's not driven by what is good. It's driven by what draws our attention and engagement. That's what does better in social media. What do we pay attention to in social media? And if something makes us engage with anger, it gets more views. It doesn't matter if it's true, it doesn't matter if it's good, it doesn't matter if it's noble. It shows up because we go, wow, that makes me mad. So I want to flame this person online or whatever. And that drives content, that drives views. It creates this perception that we're all angry with each other and thus all need to be afraid of each other. These fear and anger based approaches to engagement, they make people lots of money. But I believe they make us more fearful, more distrustful, more hateful, and more dangerous. And that's what makes me nervous. The fear drives out our capacity to open to each other. The fear drives out our capacity to open to each other, which is the absolute heart of empathy. That's what empathy is. The core of it is opening to each other. How do we understand one another? How do we care for one another? If we are consistently manipulated into being afraid of one another, being closed off from another, protecting ourselves from one another, how do we care for one another when that's going on? I would argue that empathy is perhaps the oldest and most vital moral value we have, that it is core. It is maybe the core, it may be the central and most important moral value. There's a story about anthropologist Margaret Mead. It hasn't been verified as factual. It supposedly happened in a question and answer kind of session that was not recorded. So we're not 100% sure that this story is true, but it's a good story. And she was asked by a student what she considered to be the first sign of civilization in a culture, that she looked back and, was looking back and, as an anthropologist, what did you see as the first thing? And some might have expected her to say something like tools or a certain type of agriculture or something like that. But in this story, she responded with a healed thigh bone, a healed femur. And her argument, she went on to say, is that typically, in the animal kingdom, if an injury like that occurred, the animal would die, that they would not survive that. That would be too hard to live through such an injury. But a healed femur revealed that someone took the time to care for that injured person. And that help was her sense, seeing that help, seeing that happen, that was her sense of when civilization began. Really cool idea. Not something I had thought about before, and I also will recognize it's interesting that perception came from a woman, whereas so much of our perception of history is driven by men, and it's interesting to see that different perception coming and changing our point of view, or at least changing my point of view. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, some of you may know him. He's a minister, or was a minister. He was a theologian, and he was a Nazi resistor. and he was killed during the Holocaust. And he wrote this, and he wrote some beautiful things, and he wrote this. This is the wonder of all wonders, that God loves the lowly. God is not ashamed of the lowliness of human beings. God marches right in. He chooses people as his instruments and performs his wonders where one would least expect them. God is near to loneliness. He loves the lost, the neglected, the unseemly, the excluded, the weak, and broken. I love that, regardless of where your theology is around God or that word or what that means to you or doesn't mean to you. The idea of placing the holy with the lowly, if you will, is very powerful and countercultural and extraordinary. But I also think it's kind of interesting because it's not entirely clear to me that Bonhoeffer, when referring to the lowly, might be referring to the people we might think of as lowly, like people who are homeless, for example. He may be referring to them, but I'm wondering, from Bonhoeffer's perspective, if perhaps by lowly he meant all of us, and that there's power in recognizing, I think, that we all, struggle, we all fail. None of us are perfect, and there is a shared humanity in that. Perhaps our greatest moral axiom is an axiom of empathy, and that's the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule has been expressed in every culture and spiritual tradition, and it is the definition of empathy. In Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you would find hurtful. In Confucianism, do not unto others what you would have them do unto you. In Hinduism, this is the sum of duty. Do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. In Islam, none of you truly believes until he loves for his love for his brother, until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. In Taoism, regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. In Zoroastrianism, that nature alone is good which refrains from doing unto another whatsoever is not good for itself. In Judaism, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. And in Christianity, do unto others what you would do unto yourself. Or my personal favorite, which comes from many traditions, love your neighbor as yourself. There are, of course, variations and possible improvements on the Golden Rule, such as treat others as you would want to be treated in the same situation. That's sometimes considered a variation, that you got to make sure you're not just projecting your own experience onto somebody else. You got to make sure you're listening for their experience. There's something called the Platinum Rule, which is treat others as they would wish to be treated. Cool, that's great. It's all about the act of extending. Those are different variations on helping us extend into the perceptions, the experiences, the needs, the reality of each other. And that's, I think, the core of each one of these phrases, is to get ourselves to extend out, to feel into the other, to take their perspective into account, to see them just as real, as valuable, and as vital as you yourself are. Philosopher Iris Murdoch said something which is just, you really think about this, it's going to blow your mind. This is a good one. She said, love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. Love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. I love that. You can chew on that for hours and hours. Powerful stuff. Iris Murdoch wrote a lot about religion and meditation and mysticism and things, so she comes from a tradition that really, exemplifies the greatest and speaks to the traditions that exemplify the greatest capacity for compassion that we have. Dalai Lama added to that, he said, compassion is the radicalism of our time. And Aldous Huxley said, it is a bit embarrassing to have been concerned with the human problem all of one's life and find at the end that one has no more to offer by way of advice than try to be a little kinder. And Einstein, our separation from each other is an optical illusion of consciousness. As we think about where we are, as we think about this opportunity to restore or improve upon our world in terms of increasing and creating a greater capacity to empathize, I want to offer something that I always look to. The world, as our beloved Kurt Vonnegut said, sometimes doesn't always feel like such a beautiful place. We don't always see it that way. It doesn't always appear that way. But for me, to hold on to hope, I look at human possibility. I hold in my life the greats of time, the people who have exemplified the greatest about us. And so while there are many human beings in our world that present to us something alternative to the greatest within us, including us on a day-to-day level at times, holding these people, carrying their stories, remembering them, helps me remember, and I hope helps you remember, that you are not alone in standing for what we can be. You are not alone in standing for the greatness of each other. That you are not alone in standing for our capacity to really, really, really exhibit what it means to love one another. Every religion, every tradition has called for this over and over and over and again, and it's you and me that are the ones that are going to make it happen, because there's nobody else but us. That's the way it is. We have to lead. We have to be the ones that step into that, and thank humanity, thank God that we won't be alone in that journey of standing forth. Be soft. Do not let the world make you hard. Do not let pain make you hate. Do not let the bitterness steal your sweetness. Take pride that even though the rest of the world may disagree, you still believe it to be a beautiful place. Awake, my dear, be kind to your beating heart. Awake, my dear, be kind to your beating heart. Shalom, amen, and blessed be.